I'm Steve Bonneman. I'm a second-year MSLS student. In my spare time, I'm an intern over at an unnamed Triangle Area private university. It's a rival of this one. And I primarily interested in like reference and instruction and collection development and all that public services stuff in academic libraries. Go ahead and have the panelists introduce themselves. We'll start all the way on the left.
Okay. I'm Megan Perez. I'm a second-year LS student. I work in Davis Reference and in GovDocs, and I also intern at Duke in Human Resources. And I'm interested in recruitment and development for academic libraries.
My name is Ellen Whistler. I'm also a second-year library student. My interest is in archives and in preserving digital materials, digitizing. I'm currently working in the university archives.
I'm Allison Waldenberg. I'm a second year LS, and I work in electronic resources at Davis, and I'm interested in electronic resources and digital libraries.
I'm Noel Pfizer. Nice to see you all. I'm sorry I'm so late. I'm an MSIS, and I'm actually technically 5.5 years in. So I took some time off, but I'm finishing this fall. I'm currently working at Motricity, which is a company out in RTP that does mobile devices, so it's kind of interesting over there, doing user experience engineering. And my interests, I guess, lie all over the place, but digital libraries is where I kind of started out in IS, and then in web development, and have broadened out the user experience and such, so shoot.
Great. Of course, throughout this, you all are invited, encouraged, and please, for the love of God, ask us questions. That would be the best, is for us to spend an entire hour answering just questions from you guys. I've got ones to ask, but you know, make my job easier or something. Anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and start though. I'll get us kicked off. So. There's at least a perception, kind of the general idea that people bring up a lot when they're talking about the future of libraries is to talk about the past and sort of current image of libraries as a place where books / other sources of information are stored. So the library as a collection center tends to be a pretty dominant image. I guess the first question I have is pretty broad, but how is the library's role as a collection center changing now, and how's that going to continue, you know, a few years and many years down the line?
I'll just start with a couple of thoughts, and I'd also like to highlight before I even begin to talk that I'm as curious about the future of librarianship as anyone else here. So I'm as interested if anyone wants to like shout out something and tell me something I don't know. I'd love to hear it.
That'd be great too.
But I think one thing that I've been thinking of when you mentioned collection centers are there are the electronic resources aspect of it, which of course I'm interested in, but also the consortial arrangements, which I think are becoming more and more important, especially around here. Electronic resources are becoming really, really expensive, as everyone knows, and so university libraries are beginning to engage with other university libraries to share these electronic resources. And then another question is, where do these electronic archives go, or even like where do the print versions of these electronic resources go? And one thing that UNC is doing with Duke, which I think is raising a lot of interesting questions, is that they've agreed to rent some space to put all the copies of one particular journal, all print copies of one particular journal. And so it's a new type of agreement, and so even though we're all gonna have the same online access, those print ones are gonna be in Durham. And so I think that raises some questions about, is that still gonna be the University of North Carolina collection? And that's something that I think we're all gonna have to start thinking about as physical space becomes more and more scarce. And as our resources become more and more stretched because we're putting money towards electronic resources.
Right. I think the point on electronic resources is very important because obviously that's where we're headed, no matter what we can do about it. You know, at this point, it is that direction. The big question is what gets left behind when you do this and what you try to preserve. What gets left behind, oftentimes, I was a classics major before I came to IS, and so did a lot of esoteric studying of a lot of small books that don't get checked out, but maybe once every 10 years. And I'm afraid those kind of things are the kind of things that libraries need to make sure that don't get left behind, because there's a big corporate push for putting lots of stuff on the internet, obviously, with information. And that information, while useful, is not always everything that you need to find, obviously. And so these electronic resources that libraries try to preserve are very, very important. On the flip side of that, the other big question we have is obviously there is a reason for the library to have books in it, and it's not simply just to house the books. And so there's a lot of things librarians can be for people besides just, and libraries themselves can be besides just storehouses like VAST. And you know, the expertise is one of the major things that librarians bring, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that, I think, in terms of search. But that's a major thing that needs to be preserved. Also, of course, you know, the book's not going anywhere. You know, we all like to think about that fibrous, you know, digital item that or even the tablets right now that we're seeing. But from what I understand and from what I hear from my friends and everybody else, I don't like either, particularly reading on that thing yet. So books are very tactile. We're tactile beings, and so I think that's the other thing is about, you know, it's a preservation issue, as brought up too. So lots of options here, but we have to make sure that the libraries don't get caught behind the corporate curve, because people like Google are doing a good thing in scanning all these things, or Amazon or whatever, but they're doing it for a reason, and their reason is different from what I think a library's reason should be for saving things. So.
I kind of have a little bit of a different take on the question. I don't really agree with the conceptualization of libraries as just collection centers. At the turn of the 20th century, libraries were sort of regarded as people's universities. And Dewey had this idea of the librarian somehow bridging the gap between high school students and those that could afford to go to college. So they were going to the boroughs, the outer boroughs of New York, and providing readers advisory and all these other services. And I think the ultimate goal of that approach was to help create good, valuable, contributing citizens for the nation. And I think that element of librarianship has been lost in contemporary dialogue. And that's something that I'd like to see come back.
I totally agree. Yeah. I have a lot of comments I could make about, you know, the library's role in research, you know, sort of bolstering.
I think it brings a good point, is that libraries also are supposed to be like meeting places, if nothing else. And places where people can be as opposed to books. And I think that's also being taken over by the coffee shop aspects of life and things like that, where people don't go to the library primarily anymore as that kind of place. They go to other places they feel like are more social, and so that's another issue with librarians and librarianship that has to be addressed. Because when people think of the shushing librarian still, and it's, you know, I know a lot of libraries aren't doing that anymore. A lot of libraries are being like the Davis Library, where they're trying to make and encourage spaces where people can collaborate, and that's important.
Several of the things I want to say have been touched on, but I think it's part of the reason that it's misleading to think of, you know, a library as a place where the books are, is that that's what you see. But what public, especially public libraries, you know, are, you know, were set up is to provide information, you know, to provide, you know, free or taxpayer funded, you know, information to the citizens of, you know, whatever, so that you know, even if you don't have the money to buy the book, you know, or to watch the video or whatever, that you're able to do that, that they're an access point. And that, I think, is something that doesn't change once you go to the electronic, that there's still, you know, the reason libraries are full of books is before the internet, that was the most efficient way to store information. That, you know, it's copyable, it's, you know, protected, it's very easy to tell if somebody's changed it, you know, things like that, that it's, you know, it's a very efficient way to do it. And so to provide all of that information, libraries buy books, and so now they're full of books. And as more information is going online, you know, libraries are following, but the important thing for that is really more than what they have, is that they're providing it. That, you know, things like, you know, NC Live, that the government is providing access to citizens, for citizens, to electronic journals that most people can't afford. And I think that's one of the most important parts of libraries.
And we may get to this later, but I do want to say also that I think it's something that everybody raised, that that people do come to libraries not just as collection centers, but as trusted resources. Just to emphasize that, even though maybe people are going more online, even if the library online catalog acts as more of a kind of an entree onto the internet, if there are resources there that are being collected that are freely available or available through the internet, people still use the library as a trusted resource that kind of puts a stamp of authority on a resource. And I think that's something that people who are in collection development, who are going to be facing those kinds of issues about what to put in the library catalog, they're going to have to be thinking about. That there's a difference between having a control over the resources that you're saying that you're providing and more having confidence in the resource.
Yeah, I mean, so the library definitely can be a portal to information that it doesn't itself store. I guess I wonder what we think about, like, what's next in that regard. I mean, you know, the library is a lot of these things that you guys are saying. Is there a change coming in terms of library outreach? Are we conveying to people effectively that we can be a trusted resource? Like, is that working? And is there something more that can be done and will be done in the future?
I don't know about you, but I don't really particularly like it when I have to deal with online help. So, and the chat box is just not that friendly. But in terms of what the library's goals are in the future, in terms of where it's headed, I would like to bring up the point of the digital divide and the fact that everything we're going to discuss here today, the library needs to be bridging that digital divide. I mean, it's the one place, as Ellen pointed out, that, and Megan as well, that people can go just to get information, and they have to be kind of as a trust authority situation, and people can go that don't actually have the use of a computer or the ability to use a computer, or as in use as in having it at home, or the ability or anything like that. They can get help using the computer, or they can just not use it, and that's very important because we're leaving behind a lot of people with this incremental technology growth that does not, the poverty-stricken cannot handle.
Do you think the digital divide's permanent? I mean, that's a, we're talking about, is that in 100 years, will it be similar?
Well, we haven't solved the problem of poverty in America, so yeah.
Oddly enough. No, I'm just, that's...
No, it's true. I mean,
I'm not trying to argue at all.
No.
We've had the telephone for how many years now, and there are still people who don't have telephones.
That's true.
There are people who don't have electricity. And so I think considering the combination of factors it takes to be able to bridge the digital divide, not only do you need electricity, you need a computer, you need some way of connecting to the internet. Those are all three major hurdles. So I don't think we're going to achieve that anytime soon.
Right, and there will always be people that are unfortunately left behind. There's
Yeah.
no way around that. But you try to minimize that as much as possible. And that's where the library really can have a role. And that's if people who are coordinating library services keep that always in mind, I think that's a huge benefit to the community that they can make.
Well, I think also in terms of how the library can help alleviate some of those issues, in terms of outreach and the qualifications of future outreach librarians, second languages are going to become important, if not critical. And I think it would be a really good idea for the library administration to somehow train their staff in a second language, either through consultation or do it internally through lunch workshops, have someone who knows Spanish on staff, have brown bag lunches once a week and teach you about how to use Spanish for library research or something along those lines. I also think that in terms of outreach, subject area expertise is going to be important so that librarians within the university can address the needs of subject-specific disciplines. And I think funding those programs is also going to be difficult. So an outreach librarian should probably be skilled in grant project design, grant writing, and implementation as well. So I think
that's why we go to college for 2 years to do this, right?
Yeah, I think the bar of a qualified outreach librarian is going to be set a little bit higher in the future.
Makes sense. So we've been talking for 15 minutes now. What do you guys want? I mean, we would love it to frame this conversation any way you guys want. So does anyone have a question? Does anyone have a comment based on anything we've said, or a question based on anything we haven't said? I
have a question. A lot of the issues you brought up are really interesting, especially thinking about public library, like the language or the digital divide. but none of you sounds like you're interested in public library, and I was just wondering why.
I'm abstaining.
Why we're not interested in...
Or is there something more compelling about the academic library side of things? Do you see these issues as affecting you more at the academic side, or do you feel like you can do more with them on the academic side, or is there something about the public side that you just don't want to work with?
I came to librarianship from the academic side. I worked as a collection development assistant as an undergrad, and then tried a different approach to graduate school before this, and worked as a periodicals assistant during that time. So my only real knowledge of librarianship is through academic librarianship, and I think as a former aspiring researcher, I have a good sort of understanding of the needs of the academic community, and I feel like that's where I can really contribute. I don't know much about the public side, and I just didn't really get on that track. So
the angle, and a lot of the issues are the same, but they often hit different weights, and certainly a lot of what we've discussed is public library issues. I think to some extent, though, the public libraries show sort of a wider variety of issues because of, sorry, I'm babbling. Any academic community is necessarily restricted in numbers or the materials that they need or whatever. Being interested in archives, I think there's a lot smaller divide there that, I mean, currently I'm working in the university archives, which is the archives of the records of the university, but any cultural, any archive that preserves cultural material is, in a sense, a public archive. That the North Carolina collection is run by UNC. The state archives are run by the state of North Carolina, but both of them have, large amounts of, cultural information, historical information about North Carolina. And so I think at least in the archives field, there's just a lot smaller divide there, that the issues of having, of backlogs, of dealing with, deteriorating material, public access, all of those are a lot more similar.
From my perspective, and Megan and I have talked a lot about this, various conversations we have. I know Megan's pretty interested in the idea of marketing and outreaching academic collections to public users, which, I mean, you're still dealing with a divide issue because you're talking, I mean, what kinds of public users are going to want to use an academic collection is definitely a question that needs to be answered. But I think, one way for me to answer your question is to say that I worked at State last year, and this year I'm working at Duke, and I was surprised more at Duke to find how many users from the broader population Duke has, and honestly, how open they are about letting people use computing, printing, internet resources, and all the stuff that they have. It's actually completely open access at the library where I work. And so I'm wondering whether, I definitely know that they've conceived of it as a community outreach point for the university. In the wake of recent events, I think there might be a strategic reason for that, but I think that additionally, that might be a growing edge for academic libraries in the future, is to see themselves more as kind of public goods, regardless of whether they're associated with a public institution or a private institution. But, to kind of bridge that gap themselves, kind of allow themselves to be more open institutions. And I think that there's definitely an increasing consciousness of that will probably continue into the future, kind of everyone's university.
In this vein, are you guys aware of any consortial arrangements that combine public and academic libraries?
There are some, but and there might be a new consortial agreement, but I don't know enough about it to speak to it right now.
In terms of collection use, I don't know of a real consortium agreement, but I know that the Davis reference staff was trying to provide some instruction services for public libraries, for public library users. I don't think it went very well. A lot of the programming was established by the needs of the public. We want to know how to research business issues for ourselves. So they got the business librarian to go down there and show them some business databases. Well, the people that were attending the instruction sessions didn't know how to use a mouse or navigate a browser. So that sort of put an end to that level of instruction. I think they need some other training first before they're going to be shown how to use Factiva or something. But going back to what we were talking about just a little bit earlier, one of the other things I think it's important to recognize in terms of opening up an academic collection to the public is that lots of academic institutions are funded by state money, and that means that they have to open their doors to the public. The public doesn't know that. They just aren't aware that they can walk into Davis, or they can walk into state, or they can walk into whatever university is getting money from the state and say, this is also my collection. These are my databases, and I can use these as long as I'm here. But they don't know that, and there isn't a real concerted effort to get that message out there.
I just wanted to address it also, just to come back to something that I thought might be interesting to talk about, which is the reason why I got into academic, or I came here to study academic libraries, was because I think like Megan, I had been in academic publishing before, and I was really interested in different models of publishing, and I felt like library school was one place to explore different ways of electronically disseminating information, looking at digital repositories, and I think that that is something that is happening at an academic level, and that there's a lot more conversation, a lot more research being done, that it just seems atmospherically it makes more sense, even though I think that these are issues, like everyone else was saying, that maybe don't, I don't even know if this is the right term, are going to filter down, but I think they will. Open access is an issue that is going to affect users in public libraries, obviously, but it's something that is being dealt with by people who use academic libraries, and who in academic libraries are the people who are creating digital repositories, or taking risks, or exploring new ways of disseminating information. I'm not saying that public libraries aren't, I'm just saying that that's where money and the energy seems to be driving.
At the time, because you're not dealing with people doing it.
Yeah, I mean, there is, I think, a lot. I mean, I'm not saying, I don't think that academic libraries are wealthy, but I think there are different sets of resources that academic libraries have to investigate those possibilities that public libraries don't have.
On the most basic level, because the library school is here, the librarians at UNC have access to the library journals that are subscribed for us. And so they have those resources, and a public library, chooses its online subscriptions based on its audience, and that most likely would not include, the library journal or ASIST or whatever.
Both actually bringing up a topic I wanted to kind of address, which is, as libraries move forward, where does the money come from? Because as the population is growing, yes, we can levy taxes to more people, but really, it seems to me that a lot of that money is being cut a lot of the time, and fewer people are keeping jobs in those situations. There are lots of librarian jobs out there, by the way, but that's not, it's just they're not as, perhaps as well paid as they might should be in terms of expertise, things like that. So that's my question, and I have a whole follow-up after it.
Oh, where's the money come from?
Yeah, like, where do you see it? Because I mean, what am I mean, do we partner public libraries with the Googles of the world or things like that to save money? That's a question. Another question is the pie in the sky idea that I'd like to think about for these digital data that we're trying to, and digital archives that we're talking about, is if they were treated like a commodity, like a resource, like water. Like you pay for your water per month per usage. And if we got to that point with these kind of things, there's a with digital music, people brought this idea up, and digital media like that. and selling it as a commodity, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. But that's, if that's the pie in the sky idea. That then instead of everybody having to pay for this subscription, or the libraries, you can pay just for the usage, and therefore public libraries could tailor their usage based on how many people they have, as opposed to having to pay that exact amount per year for everything they want, and therefore they could actually serve their community better. Now that's obviously, like I said, not going to happen anytime soon, but that's my hope.
You're talking about the library paying for use of a service,
in other words,
right?
yes. In other words, I might pay for my subscription to certain magazines or periodicals on a per-use basis on a very small amount because it's online and I just need it this one time kind of thing. And libraries could do the same thing. But the nice thing about that is that on a per-use basis, then it becomes really about, since you can track that using the internet, you really get down to the nitty-gritty. You don't have to be, because there's a lot of fluff that people keep talking about, okay, do we really need this journal? Well, only 5 people come and use this. What do we do,
Well, in the
We
current...
do that for some resources. We pay for tokens. We spend a certain amount of money on tokens. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, you buy OCLC searches, right? Isn't that how that works? That model definitely works. That
My
way for
short
world.
answer, not to sound like a broken record, is consortial agreements are just going to become more and more important, and it's just going to raise more and more issues for libraries about who owns what.
Right. Well, it is kind of a power issue, right? It's like the libraries coming together gives them more power against the publishers. And there's going to be a point where the publishers will shoot back at the libraries. Maybe that's a question we can ask too, is what do we see about that?
I've got 2 things to say about that. There was a question on our sheet that we are sort of getting at, but it was about, a lot of the future of librarianship is talked about in terms of digital technology and digital information and all that stuff. So what else do we need to pay attention to? And Noel brought up the issue of resources and resource development. And I think resource development in general is going to be a huge issue, not just in terms of money, but in terms of staff, getting trained people into the profession, and occupying positions of leadership and management that are going to be vacated in the next 10 years. But in terms of actually coming up with a plan for developing resources, I think looking at other professions as models is worth looking at, like the healthcare profession. The healthcare profession shares a lot with our profession because of the centrality of information in those professions. It's a little more critical in the healthcare profession because wrong information in an ER situation is going to result in a life or death situation, but that's not true at the reference desk. Hopefully. But they are also impacted by technology the way we are. Doctors don't have to physically write out prescriptions and send them down the line for them to get filled. They can do it electronically. So technology is having an impact on the number of staff that are required to do things in the healthcare industry. Also, librarians and nurses are facing similar sorts of market pressures, job market pressures. There are lots of people that are retiring from the nursing industry that are not recommending it to their peers, that feel it has a lingering negative image. They're having trouble recruiting people into the field. And the demographics of the nursing population and the library science population are very similar. It's mostly female, it's mostly white. The age group of the average student is about the same. So I think looking at the healthcare profession would be something that the academic community can benefit from.
Keeping in mind they have a lot more money.
Right, but they also come up with some sort of plan or some innovation that allows them to secure that money from a private donor or through a contract arrangement. And I think libraries can do something like that too.
Oh, definitely on different scales, basically, because the life and death thing kind of does give them a chance to get more money, basically. Cancer research sounds a lot better than
Pharmaceutical agreement.
yeah. So, but yeah, you're right. Actually, those are very good places to look.
That's a model.
Money finding, I think, in a lot of ways comes down to outreach, too. I mean, there has to be a perception in order to increase library budgets, especially at the public level, that they do something that people care about. And currently, I mean, you talk a lot about the fact that there's this social desirability bias. When you ask questions about libraries, people really want to say that libraries are a good thing. But if you actually find out how many people use them, it actually physically would say, I would pay more taxes to support a library, it's fairly low. Whereas you do get people to agree to stadium initiatives. I'm not sure that that's I'm not sure that that's better for the public than a library. And so, you know, I mean, how do we increase, like, how do we improve the library's image? I mean, as of right now, libraries are good at bridging the digital divide, but the problem is people who are on one side of the digital divide don't necessarily need libraries to help them do it. They're going to stay home and search on the internet. So what do we, I mean, how do we get people who vote to want to opt in more? Or do we just, you know, secret it away and sort of like, you know, budget committees? I mean,
one of the things I mentioned earlier is I think a very important thing is that treating the library not simply as a storehouse, we talked about this everybody, but you know, as a social space, as an expertise location, which the internet is somewhat good at, but definitely it's not the same thing if you go up to a reference librarian and ask for help. Yeah. It's not the same thing as going online and asking for help, even if they can give you the exact same information. There's a different experience there. And that's really what it comes down to, right, is that experiential quality of going to the library and how you would improve that in a time where people are looking at the library as more and more of kind of an obsolete object, which is unfortunate.
I can tell you, to a city council, it looks like an awfully expensive park, though. Right. You know, I mean, if you're trying to use like the information commons, you know, idea where people come and share and, you know, don't have picnics, but, you know, bring their books and read together or whatever it is. It really does look like a really expensive, you know, compared to how much it takes to, you know, mow the lawn at a public park. You know,
of course, public libraries have had this problem all along because it's always been a hard thing to say. It's like the last thing on the budget, right? Generally speaking, you know, it's an expensive thing. It's totally pro bono for the public, and it's totally in a way that it's just supposed to be raising the level for everybody, and it's very hard sometimes to justify that. And when you've got to make sure that you take care of the potholes or whatever else that's on the budget. So
what do we think? Do we partner them in with Google? I mean,
that's the question.
Do we? I mean, maybe is that?
It's scary.
How would that be bad? That's a good question. Like, what would be the drawbacks of something like corporate partnership for a public library?
Well, that's
a public library.
Yeah.
I think there would need to be caution taken, because ultimately even a business that has "Don't be evil" in their mission statement is a business. You know, whatever decisions they're a business. They're trying to make money, and so, you know, businesses do charitable things, and certainly Google is among them. But I would worry that there would be a loss of autonomy, that, you know, libraries, you know, in doing that, for instance, a library whose library system has partnered with Google would probably have problems using another search engine on their library computers.
Fair enough.
Now, whether or not, you know, that's a good thing or a bad thing, that depends. But to take authority for some of those decisions away from the library, I think, also takes it away from the people who, you know, have spent 2 years or more trying to figure out the best way to do things. And I'm not sure that that's a good thing.
I think before we even get to that point, this is something probably, Megan, you can speak to better, because I know I've talked to you about this a bit, and you have a lot of great ideas about marketing, and that's something that maybe I think this program could teach, or at least address a little better, that before you get to the point where you're like, you know, need the money so bad that you're giving over control to Google, you learn how to treat your library like a business, and you learn how to market, and you learn how to sell yourself, and you like change the mindset maybe of some of the people who work there, that they are actually in a service profession. As you know, it is a very complicated profession because people are asked to take on lots of different roles. It's not, you know, just being it's not just like knowing information. It's not just being an expert in something. It's actually helping people find information. There is a customer service aspect to it that I don't think that people are too comfortable with. But I do think that the library needs to, or at least the library profession, needs to take seriously learning how to promote and learning how to run a business. I mean, it's just common sense.
Yeah, I can understand how people don't like to compare libraries or institutions of higher education to businesses, but in some sense they are. They may not be for profit, but they have a budget, they have to perform, they have to evaluate themselves, and they have to report to the people that provide them with funding. So, in some way, I do like looking at business models and business research to see what universities and libraries can do to improve their performance. As far as marketing goes, I think that some libraries in little remote parts of the country are beginning to use existing technology to promote themselves and to market themselves in ways that are cost effective. They are podcasting, or they are using social network tools like Friendster and Facebook and MySpace. And there was an article about 6 months ago from a librarian at Georgia Tech who decided he's going to give this Facebook thing a try. It seems a little weird. I'm 56 and I'm reaching out to 18-year-olds, but why not? So he did it, and he I think sent out 1,000 or 1,200 invites, and he was friended by maybe 10 people. But people recognized him at football games and at social events, and they're like, "Hey, you're the librarian. Oh, thanks for that email. I'm coming into this instruction session." So it was a positive experience for him, and he said he's going to continue to do it year after year because he is reaching people. And because he is a friend on one person's page, other students are recognizing him and adding him when he didn't even email them in the first place. So it does have some effect, and it's free. So
There's the other.
I just had a quick question about what corporate partnerships with libraries would look like. Like, what does the corporation provide and what do they get in return? What's their incentive?
I had a real quick comment on that exact question. My only comment was going to be that my fear is that corporate sponsorship is going to, in my view, eliminate choice for the user, choice of a browser, choice of information provider, and that's one of the biggest things that libraries do provide is choice of information, be it right, wrong, of one perspective or another. You've got the ability to choose what you want to do.
Well, there are other versions of corporate branding, though. It doesn't have to be, I mean, maybe it's not Microsoft or Google, maybe it's somebody else that wants to put their logo on the door when you come in the library. I mean, the question is that, okay,
Yeah.
it's not a choice thing if it's McDonald's, although that would be weird, but,
But, other businesses have gone to that model.
Right.
Try and find a sports team's arena or ballpark that isn't sponsored by Staples or Coca-Cola or
The Royal Bank of Canada.
yeah, that's pretty neutral. Yeah, they're not named after people anymore. They're named after corporations.
which is a sad thing, but it's
It
a
is.
way to get money, so libraries may have to take on that role.
Yeah.
But the real money is with individuals. I mean, 80% of the philanthropy in this country is with individuals, so that's where the money is. And so I don't know that we are doing a super great job of finding, and they require a lot less in return. So I don't know if we're doing such a great job at finding those folks who believe in public access of information. Obviously, universities do a really great job with their donors, but I don't know that there's been a really super way to find private money to go to public libraries or other things. That's where the money is.
Actually, in Durham County, they started a Friends of
Right.
group kind of thing, and so they actually have an institution in place now that supports the library system in addition to the tax money. Because the other thing that's interesting with the tax, the public money that comes in has to be spent within the calendar year, so there's no at the end of the year it has to be zero. And so what the Friends group does is, in addition to providing additional funds from individuals and companies, but then again, the companies they just get, gold star status from the Friends group. They're don't have any power, I don't think, or whatever. But not only that, that money can ebb and flow and doesn't have to be spent within one calendar year. So there's a lot of advantage from that model, I think.
We just have to get more people to want to be our friend.
Or it's MySpace or whatever. I mean, that's
Yeah, but that's not unusual. The Chapel Hill Public Library, I'm on the board there. We have a foundation and a friends group, and the foundation deals with endowment money and this kind of thing, and larger gifts, and the friends does programming and other stuff. And that's pretty common in public.
Yeah,
I was going to say that's the same thing, actually, but it's you're right.
How much interface does the staff of the library have with with the Friends group?
Well, the Friends group at the Chapel Hill Public Library also provide volunteers and adult programming. So there's a lot of interaction there. The foundation generally has had less until just recently they sponsored a everybody read a book of their president book big thing. Instead of say community because they get differential results. Save them to draw or Pittsburgh.
So that this idea brings up, this Friends, and also the marketing idea we were kind of skirting on is, if we go towards corporate competition for libraries, then we're in the pop culture and how you get more people that want to be in libraries, because there's those people that will want to donate to libraries, there's those people that want individuals, but it seems to me that there's so much more media competition out there for especially young people's attention. And those are the people you'd really like to be able to get to the libraries if you could, and this is kind of the idea of promotion, is how do you do that? I mean, that's something I kind of yet to figure out.
Well, I think one solution is, to catch them early, that the trend of schools dropping their school media centers because of funding or whatever also means that students, when a student has a report on something, and they have a school media center, they learn with that first report because the teacher, lines them all up and takes them to the media center and says, go find the right book, or ask the librarian how to find the right book. And having that, habituate that, summer reading programs, having library outreach, not just to adults, but also to kids, so that, a kid who discovers the library usually doesn't forget it.
Particularly if it's a fun experience, you'd hope.
You'd hope.
Now, granted, knowing that I didn't forget the library and now I'm sitting here as a library school student, I may not be the best example, but I think that keeping libraries as part of education is vitally important.
I have a comment. One thing that we haven't addressed yet is, and this kind of goes along the lines of what if we had to be accountable to a Google or a Microsoft or some large corporation. We are accountable to our government, who provides a lot of funding. And I think there is some disconnect between the understanding of library and information professionals and governmental officials and politicians as to what the value of the service is. And so I think there needs to be a much greater deal of advocacy for libraries within who's already funding us. I mean, it's not just convincing users that this is a great place, pay your taxes, and we'll continue to have it. It's also, we're dealing with a much more strict structure that needs a bigger push.
There was a study in the last couple of years. It was very complex and took a number of years, but it was looking at someplace in Florida, and they looked at the tax money that went to the libraries and then surveyed people or whatever, and the conclusion they came to is that the city or county or whatever got $6 of benefit out of every dollar that they put into the library. And I think if more studies like that could be done, it's very easy to to hand somebody return on investment, fund us, and it's a lot harder to say public good, because it's very hard to quantify the public good.
That was Dean Griffiths.
Yeah.
Oops.
I have a very general question. The most popular question I get from prospective students is, where's the library going? What is its future like? I mean, I was a graphic arts major in college, and I remember I had to read this article on the future of paper and the fact that, paper is going away. I mean, the graduate school won't give you a paper application anymore. Everything's online. So I just want you all's general view on where do you see the library going in, like the year 2026, we're all years old.
Well, I think that one thing that I've noticed and I think is going to continue is like sexier looking stacks. Like, I don't know if anybody's been to the library over in Cameron Village in Raleigh. It looks like a Barnes and Noble. like where you can like go for subject-based and the shelves are low and you like actually might want to be in there for longer than 2 minutes while you're like hunting your book. I think that's, you know, I mean, I don't mean to be too sarcastic, but I think that might be one, you know. Like, the space is definitely going to look more open, I think, is one thing that definitely seems to be the trend. And, you know, the information commons that they're building in places like the undergraduate library is the same, you know, very much in the same vein. I think that's one big change.
More experiential than just getting in there, getting your book, and getting out, because you could do that online again. So now, how do you get people to come? And that's a big piece of it.
I'll just, one comment on that note. I think the idea of making library space more personable is something that designers and administrators have been struggling with for a long time. But what's good for people is bad for books in terms of climate and temperature and all those other things. So the problem has been trying to integrate the book and the people space so that the books are preserved for as long as possible and people are comfortable in that space. And that's tricky to do, and that's why stacks look the way they do. That's why they're cold and empty and kind of lifeless, you know?
Well, they can address it something like how Davis does, where there are stacks upstairs that are kind of tight and very full, and then there's stack in the second level where there's some stacks, but it's mostly open space to go study. Yeah. It just depends on how big your space is, and that's another question actually that comes up, is how big of a space your library is going to have if books are becoming less and less the central focus, if it's more digital.
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see what's happening. The undergraduate library at the University of Texas in Austin is not really a library anymore. It's an information something. They basically took out all the books. Whatever was duplicated in the other libraries was eliminated, and they have a core of maybe 1,000 titles in the back of a room, and it's just a computer commons, basically. And
with reference people, right?
It's not unlike our undergraduate library here.
I don't even think they're reference trained.
No,
I think they're just sort of like
what a loss. I mean, come on. Like, so, isn't that where librarians need to be in the future? In the year 2026, there's going to be librarians in that building.
They said that's what the students wanted, and that's what the faculty wanted, and that's what was needed, so they gave it to them. So this was only a couple of years ago, but I think it'll be interesting to see how that arrangement is received in 5 or 10 years.
I think I'll just a quick comment that we've touched on the academic ones. With public ones, it sort of also goes back to accountability, that I think it's a lot harder to say we want to spend money on comfortable couches. No, really, we want to spend money on comfortable couches, your taxpayer money. Well, because people want to sit on comfortable couches. That with public libraries, it's harder to be able to say, let's make this nice, because of the budget constraints. And so I think other areas also need to be explored more with public libraries.
Well, probably other facets of the user experience, right? Because I'm sure public libraries for the longest time it was head counts, and it was number of books checked out, probably. And maybe it's not number of books checked out anymore. Maybe it's something else, because that's not going to be the same. And hopefully people are designing around that.
Maybe we need to not lose sight of that, though, because I definitely know that there's this definite perception in library school right now that if we, especially like university libraries, if we have people sitting in the library studying, that we're like winning their hearts and minds. And I'm not sure that that's always true, because a lot of times libraries are just the most convenient space to do that. I think there needs to be something a little more robust along with it. Like, you know, that just, you know, having comfortable couches doesn't mean that you're providing what libraries should be providing in terms of the public.
Well, that's the question.
More than just a coffee shop.
Yeah, more than it, like, because I mean, definitely people have talked about it. We need to just get more people in the door. I don't know, like that's true. I don't know whether that's
something really quick, and then I'm just gonna say, I think that I'll say that librarians are really gonna need to learn a lot more about the law. Like learn more about copyright law, learn more about everybody's access to information, and I think that it's going to be really interesting to see how that changes and how that changes people's perceptions of what kinds of information they're allowed to access and what kind of information they're allowed to use. And I think that that's just opens up a whole different discussion, but I did want to say that.
But keep standing up for First Amendment rights.
John?
Someone brought up Barnes & Noble, and I just been thinking of that, because I was thinking Barnes & Noble and Borders and whatever other bookstore is basically a library with a lot less resources available, and you have to pay for everything. Yet Barnes & Noble and Borders are both very successful business models. So as far as getting in with a corporate partner, maybe that's an angle that could be explored, where that could be a win-win situation where, hey, you can go check out this book, and if you like it, you can buy it at Borders, you know, or something like that. So I think that would be something where maybe that could be explored, that maybe you're not compromising anything, but it's kind of the same business, just one's for profit and one isn't.
That would scare the heck out of Barnes.
Well, I think we already have that program, because if you just don't return the book, you have to pay for it. So that's it's a little known policy, but it still works. But the other thing was the mention of the law, and I think that is it could be the most important aspect of the library in the future, because so much has been done. You know, when we look at the fact that public domain is just disappearing. You know, and we said, oh, well, great, you know, every year something else will enter, and we have, you know, wonderful projects that we're taking advantage of that, and now that's over. You know, for many people's lifetime, you know, that's not going to happen, and, you know, unless we get a law change. And I'm sure that there's going to be plenty of people that, you know, when we get to the end, you know, the folks who didn't invent Winnie the Pooh will say that, you know, we want another 100 years on that. And it's keeping the information out of the hands of the people that, you know, might do something with it. And just saying, you know what, we're going to hold on to this, and it's ours, and if you throw enough money at us, we might license something to you. But it's really counter to the spirit of how libraries have developed for centuries.
And the sad part about that is we're holding on to this. It's just Disney holding on to like their little characters, but it encompasses everything else that's in that time frame, which is the awful part. So.
And we don't want Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, well, but I mean, libraries may need more lawyers too. I mean, maybe there's a partnership there between like the intellectual property.
That'd be a good thing.
I mean, you know, because we've got like a scholarly communications librarian at most universities, and that's a person who rarely has a law degree. They have like some expertise, but you know, it's not quite the same. And I wonder whether, because I mean, every hospital's got a lawyer. I mean, every single one has like a law department, and you know, I mean, I wonder whether there might be a spot for that.
Here at UNC, we have Deborah Gerhardt, who is an attorney.
Correct. Yeah.
Again, that brings up the academic versus public thing. It's a little harder to do on the public side.
But maybe there's a consortial aspect.
That's right.
The Public Library Association has like a cadre of lawyers that goes around and solves information issues.
But I think, you know, looking at the copyright thing, that libraries need to be on the forefront of that. That one of the fundamental, you know, tenets of a library is when the library buys a book, they can lend it to as many people, you know, until it falls apart, and then they can rebind it and keep lending it. That once you get into the electronic things, sometimes you can buy a CD-ROM, you know, same thing, but with an increasing number of resources are subscription-based or license-based, where you can't do that. You're not limited by the survivability of the materials. You're limited by some legal constraint, and I think libraries, consortial or independently working to continue to push that will ultimately, you know, benefit both libraries and, you know, and the people who use them. That we need to get fair use a little wider again.
I would be really interested in knowing, speaking from the floor.
Yes,
Dr. Marshall has the floor.
How flexible you see yourself in terms of what you're going to do in your career? That is, and how many want to work in libraries? I have to see this. How many definitely want to work in libraries here?
If you include archives.
But by definitely you don't mean
Okay.
and only in libraries.
Well, how many would consider working outside of libraries and some other kind of information job?
If it was nonprofit.
If it was nonprofit. Okay, well that's fair enough. But I think, you know, we might want to think of the LIS degree as like the MBA, or even lawyers. A lot of lawyers work outside of courts, right? I mean, we just happen to be named after a building, but it doesn't mean we have to work in a public, academic, or special library. We can do a lot of different kinds of work. And you were talking about the future of the profession.
I mean, I think a lot of that will depend on the extent to which we are open and creative about what kind of knowledge, skills we have and how those can be applied in different sorts of fields and endeavors. But I'm just, you know, and the word library now doesn't necessarily mean a building, of course. It could be a digital library. It could be any collection of information that a user group wants. So really the thing is so open, it's almost scary. I mean, really. But I'm just wondering how you folks feel. Like, do you see yourself maybe going into a library right now, always working in a library, willing to change, going back and forth? Do you see barriers to that kind of model for the profession?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question because we've been focusing this entire discussion on where are libraries going, which is separate from where are librarians going. There are lots of bits of research out there that show the number of graduates of library schools is not sufficient to replace the number of jobs, or vice versa, depending on how you use the data. But the profession is graying, and budgets are flat, as are salaries, as is the image. So there are not a lot of people coming, there isn't an increasing number of people coming into the profession. And more graduates are going into the business sector, or into government positions, or into tech positions, or into .coms. And personally, I started looking at the private sector and at businesses, just given the interests that I have and that I've developed here in school. I'm interested in recruitment issues and human resources issues, and those don't necessarily have to be employed by a library. I can see myself working in the business industry, developing some skills, and then coming back with more skills and working in a library after that. So I think there are lots of open opportunities if you're flexible.
Well, that's hopefully what the SILS and SIS teaches us is to be flexible, because it's a very broad degree and you get a lot of information. That gives us a lot of opportunity to go pretty much anywhere, but it also gives you a lot of responsibility. And you know, those on the IS side, I think, feel probably a lot worse, because we kind of come in not thinking about libraries at all, but then come in and say, well, this is actually a valid place to be, and feel like maybe we should contribute to that. So.
Yeah. There might need to be more increased perception and maybe outreach by library schools, you know, conceptual LIS schools, among people who aren't either in libraries, in publishing, or in the IT professions, because that's those are the only places that I see that actually like seem to care that SILS is here. They're the ones that come to us and say we're recruiting and we'll post this on your job server or whatever. I wonder, like, first of all, whether there are totally more opportunities outside that, which I know that there are. I mean, I know that there are opportunities as researchers at places like insurance companies and a million different places you can work, but I don't know how visible that is to people who are recruiting in those fields. And they might not see me with my library degree as a person who's qualified to work in that way.
Yeah, I guess it would sort of fall on the degree holder to recognize which of your skills are transferable to the skills desired by the potential employer.
It would also fall on the employer to like have a little imagination in that regard, which they don't always. Y'all ever deal with recruitment?
I can tell you right now, I was just over at the job fair right before this, which is why I was kind of late, and they aren't looking for like librarians or IT people, generally speaking, over there. It's all business, it's all. So you have to be able to curve yourself into their nets. There are tons of people over there, but there's not.
Yeah, and one easy way of doing that is just look at job descriptions in other areas and look at the skills that they're requiring or asking for and think about, well, do I have that ability? Actually, I do, and I learned it from cataloging, but you might not have thought about it in those terms.
I think the degree holders are going to need some help, though.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, like whoever's in charge of marketing library school to the field or whatever, the fields.
A lot of schools like ours have changed their name to like School of Information, and SILS never has. Now it's interesting, is that, do you think we should?
I still like the word library science.
How long has it been library and information science rather than...
Since the mid-'80s, when we brought in the Master of Information Science degree. That's when it changed.
Well, coming from the IS side, I would say it's probably a good idea, but and it's not to say that libraries aren't important, I don't say that at all, but the perception of the word library is changing. As we just said, it's not the same thing, and people have this antiquated idea of it, and it might be a good idea to try to either market it out, and have lots of push, or if you can't do that, you do other things that change the perceptions. We are an information school, no question. I mean, that's really what we do here. It's just a matter of how we apply it.
It is interesting because if we've done this like 10 years ago in some of the, I don't know, Michigan and some of these other places, I mean, my own humble opinion is that they missed the boat because they did that before the word library came to mean so much more with all the digital libraries and stuff. And I personally think we have a huge advantage, but it's up to each and every one of us to get out there and tell the world that a library does not necessarily have four walls. A library is any collection of information that you need, and we've got a whole group of fabulous professionals who are capable of putting that together and providing user service. So, it's I guess it's a mindset, but it really is interesting. Is that an advantage or a disadvantage? And all of our associations, like the American Library Association, Special Libraries Association, Medical Library Association, they've got library in them, but those people are also doing a lot more things, and we're organized as a profession, which, interesting enough, information science is not organized like that. So it's a huge advantage we have. And there's so many ways in which we're now being looked at in these policy areas, the privacy, the copyright, all as experts. Huge opportunities.
I think it's important to also recognize the heritage of the term library, rather than just saying, okay, well, it's changed to mean something else. It also goes back thousands of years, and I'm very proud to be a part of that heritage.